Kevin McGuffey on the line from Last Word on College Football, breaking down Kentucky football, talking Kentucky football this February and March as the Cats hit the practice field in just a few weeks, culminating with the Blue-White Spring game on April 11th. Unfortunately, Kevin, 2 years ago when this team finished in the top 10 in the nation, and we talked about it a lot at the time, they were not given the credit that I thought they deserved based on the schedule, which was, of course, brutal in the SEC. They didn't have a big non-conference schedule, but still. And so they didn't have that big win out of conference to point to. And in the midst of that was a defensive performance that was off the charts good. That was a dominant defense that I think gets lost nationally because it doesn't have the name Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, Clemson on it. And it was just amazing to see what they were able to do week in, week out in carrying that team to 10 wins and a top 10 finish. So here we are 2 years later after they were able to in the mark of this program and what Mark Stoops has been able to do is obviously they came down a notch from what they accomplished in 2018, but not much. And they finished with a bowl win. They finished 8-5, and it looks like it's sustainable at this point. And the core of this team continues to be a defense in which they don't necessarily have the stars that they had 2 years ago, but a lot of really good players.
Oh, you're exactly right. And you think Kentucky, they gave up 30 games in the Belk Bowl, but if you go back to 2018, I think it's 17 games now that Kentucky hasn't given up more than 30 points in a game. I think it was the Georgia game 2018. It was the last time they gave up more than 30. And as you said, losing Josh Allen, losing their entire secondary. And, like I said, a lot of those guys, Lonnie Johnson, Mike Edwards, they all went on, and you saw them playing on Sunday, this past year. Like I said, they have a lot of guys returning, and it starts up front. They got some really good news when Phil Hoskins, one of their top, defensive linemen, he missed, most of last season with an injury. He applied for a 6 year of eligibility, and it was granted. So he's going to be, having him back and having him healthy is going to be huge for the team. You also have Quentin Bohanna, who, talked possibly going to the NFL, but, he's coming back as well. You've got, like I said, you've got a lot of these guys, Marquand Marcall was, the top, recruit from a couple years ago. He played some great minutes for him. And then somebody to watch out for this year is Justin Rogers, who's another defensive lineman out of Michigan, who's Kentucky's top-rated recruit. And honestly, I think at least in the Rivals, trying to remember, in the Rivals era, he's Kentucky's top-rated recruit ever. I think he's somewhere around 14th, five-star guy they got out of Michigan, beat out Michigan State and those guys. He's going to be a guy I think that's, he's going to be hard to keep off the field. But, Kentucky's really lucky in that up front. They've got a lot of guys who can play a lot of minutes. It's much like much like we talked about with the running backs. So, like I said, the defensive line, I think, is going to be one of their strong points. And honestly, I think the whole defense, as you said, it's not a whole lot of big name guys like the Josh Allens and, the people we talked about. But, they do lose Cash Daniel, but they have DeAndre Square, Jamin Davis, Chris Oates, guys like that who played a lot of minutes and did a lot of really, really good things last year. Boogie Watson, outside linebacker. You have Josh Paschal and Jordan Wright. Like I said, these are all, these are names you're going to hear on Saturday, and you're going to hear them, doing a lot of really, really good things. So, like I said, going into last season, you and I talked, and the secondary was going to be the big, that was the big question mark because nobody knew, they lost the entire secondary, and that group just came up huge last year. Yusuf Corker is probably the biggest name at safety, returning guy. I did a thing, at the end of the year last year, picking a, like all, whatever, recap team. And I picked him as my defensive MVP, for Kentucky last year. He led the team in tackles, and he should be anchor, he'll be the anchor of the secondary. And then they have Devontae Robinson, probably at the other safety, who missed last season because of an injury. He's going to be back. And, like I said, I think that they should be really, really, really strong, really, really strong on defense again, carrying on that, it'd be interesting to see how many more games they can go with that 30, not giving up more than 30 points. Cause obviously the schedule is a little more difficult this year. They They don't play Arkansas, and they do play Auburn. They have to go to Auburn, and then of course you have Tennessee and Florida down there, Georgia up here, and then you have, of course, as you and I like to talk, the non-conference schedule is maybe not the most difficult. The trip to up I-64 to Louisville is probably their most difficult game, but they have, they've beaten the Cardinals handily the last 2 seasons, so. You could make the point. I'm going to say this, and we'll see what happens come September. Even Georgia, you could almost make, because you don't know what Georgia's going to have this year, that Kentucky could win. At least have a chance to win every game this year. I may be going out on a limb, but that's okay. That's what predictions in February are for. So I'm not saying it's going to happen, because we know what happens. Kentucky hasn't won at Tennessee since 1984. Finally beat Florida for the first time in 31 years, 2 years ago down there. And then, of course, Georgia is Georgia. But, looking at it, honestly, I think at the schedule, you don't see that one game where like, oh, they have no chance of winning this game. And I think that says a lot for what Stoops and the coaching staff have done with this program.
Yeah, I totally get the point. I don't think Kentucky's going to go 12-0, but if you look at each individual game, there is not a game on the schedule that you say, okay, mark that off as a loss, as we have been able to do in past years. I'm looking at the productivity coming back, and as you mentioned, Corker and Square, the top 2 tacklers last year, was 74 and 69. They're back. You did say Jamar Watson's coming back?
Yes. Yeah,
he was the biggest disruptor in the backfield for opposing offenses, 11.5 tackles for loss and 6.5 sacks. Joshua Pascal with 9.5 tackles for loss and 3.5 sacks. And on down the line, you mentioned McCall and Bohanna will have bigger roles this year. They had 4 and 3 tackles for loss last year. So despite a couple of key losses that you're always going to have, the defense is pretty stout.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Like I said, it's, it may not be, the Josh Allen led team, but I really think you're going to see them right up there again near the top, near the top of the SEC and near the top of the, the NCAA, because they were, they threw some very impressive numbers, especially with that secondary last year. And I think, we're looking for more, here we're looking for more, looking for more of the same. The first few years, this would be Stoops, going into his 8th year, I think. The first few years, it was just trying to build that foundation, and now they've gotten that foundation, and it's just consistently, trying to keep it consistent. That 7-8 wins, maybe have a 10-win season like they had in 2018, thing like that. So now that you've got to that point, you don't want to slip back down to where you've been in years past, where you're 6th, 7th place in the SEC. So that's the big thing this year now, is just keeping that momentum going.
All right, folks, please check out Kevin, Tony Siracusa. We got Jason Ray over Last Word on College Football. They do an outstanding job of covering the nation across the board. Of course, lock it in here at MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. We are getting to as many teams as we possibly can before spring practice starts, including Kentucky. Kevin, we appreciate you stopping by. As always, great discussion. Hope you have a great week.
Oh, thank you, Mark. As always, it's a great, it's always great getting to talk to you and talking Kentucky football. And as you said, we're in February, and now, of course, the biggest thing right now is everybody's complaining about the Joe Lunardi's bracketology today. Kentucky's won 6 in a row, and they dropped a spot in the last bracketology. But but that's it. But you do hear so much more talk now around town, around the state. It used to be November to March. You never heard any talk about football, but it's a consistent thing now, and it just shows, as we talked about, what Stoops and the coaching staff have done with this program.